I am so excited and pleased to introduce not only my dear friend, but esteemed colleague, Dr. Karen McGarry. Karen holds both a PhD and an MFA, and she wrote her dissertation on making reflection real, using arts-based reflection to enhance reflective dispositions with pre-service art education teachers. She has worked as an artist educator in elementary, secondary, and higher education capacities in Michigan, Ohio, and California. In addition to keeping an active studio practice for visual art making informed by her arts-based research practices, Karen is also an associate professor of art education here at CCS, as well as a section lead. And her research interests and practices include arts-based research, which you might have heard referred to as ABR, teacher education, critical reflection, DEI and access, belonging, and whiteness, and examining ART, which is artist, researcher, teacher, identity, development, generation, and visualization. So I'm very excited to welcome her here to share her work and her thinking and her brilliance with all of us today. Karen, welcome, and you can take it away.
Oh, thanks, Amy. That was so very kind introduction. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So this is me now and little me on the slide. That's at Sleeping Bear Dunes when I was about 6 years old, and it's an interesting. I put it there because I feel like I'm kind of bookending this experience of being from Michigan, but then my life took me away from Michigan for so long, and then how life works, it's kind of brought me back. I'm going to talk about this work of art. I'm going to kind of use this as a grounding for my talk. I call this still, immobile, enduring, and here. And it's an ongoing project. I've been working on it for several years, but it's kind of spurred a lot of different research and ways of thinking about my artwork. So I have and hopefully this is, yeah, okay. So I wanted to kind of share how the kind of graph developed as I was making this. So on top of the mixed media on canvas that was shown in the previous slide, I have this kind of graph. And in the graph, we've got this vertical axis, a horizontal, and then this diagonal. And the vertical represents this idea of being in place or immobile, while the horizontal goes out to enduring and moving place. And then there's the idea on the vertical axis is being still, and then still being represents the enduring. And then the idea is being place. That is place. For me is being here. And I have used the word still a lot, and being still and still being. And part of what happened is I started to introduce kind of a scatter plot of verbs and words that represented this journey of being still and still being, as parts of being here. And so I've kind of arranged now some artwork that I'm going to share with you along my journey. And the words are kind of placeholders for how I see some of this. So this first one represents some work that I did when I was doing my MFA at the University of Illinois in Chicago. It was a real conceptual focus there. So I came in to that program with my BFA from Wayne State over there. And it was in kind of drawing, printmaking, but heavy focus on life drawing concentration. And when I had that portfolio to present to the School of the Art Institute and UIC in Chicago, they were like, yeah, no one's interested in looking at that. So I actually got a fellowship then to go to Oxbow over in Saugatuck and started a whole new body of work while I was there. And I reapplied and got into UIC. And I'm really happy I chose that program because it was smaller. My incoming class was like a December class, and there were only 4 of us in it. So we got to be really tight as a cohort. So part of the idea of fixed and being in place, I was examining ideas of identity. And one of the things you're going to see is I use dress pattern paper a lot in my work. One of the things I have stockpiles of are dress patterns. My mom did sew for a long time. So I have all of this. And for me, it's a connection to drawing because it's also represents like this idea of femininity in a way, though I know a lot of, you know, dressmakers are not just women, but the idea of femininity about this because the paper is extremely fragile, but it can also be very directional. It can be very forceful. And also, if you use enough gel medium, like what I did in these, I made 2 coats of armor with this dress pattern paper. Also, this was from, I took this, I stopped on the expressway and took a picture of this one day, the tank out of Normal, Illinois. And that was part of a self-portrait series, which was a lot of fun to unpack. And it was just this is the actual picture. I didn't do anything to it. That was the day. While I was at UIC, I did a lot of work with sculpture and installation and video. And this was let's see, a tape recording. Yes, it's a tape player, but it played this song, I Won't Dance, Don't Ask Me. And on top are, you can't really see from this slide because it's really crappy resolution, but it's a pair of point shoes, ballet point shoes. And this is another image back here that I called cord, and it's all point shoes stacked up to look like a cord of wood. And then I had all of these football player shoulder pads that I put feathers on. So it was a bit of like an ode to Swan Lake. And then in the front here are a pair of baseball cleats that I recorded myself tap dancing in those, and it just played so you could hear this tap dancing sound throughout. So I thought of all of these things as like kind of a fixed kind of look at identity. Another word, static, came up. That was one of my scatter plot points. These aren't really in a chronological order because I think the verbs represent me in different places throughout time. The idea of still, I do a lot of drawings of boats. And for me, the boat, especially like an empty boat, old boats remind me of coffins. And I think of Moby Dick, and I think of how Ishmael like survives floating around in a coffin. And it has this idea of presence and being, but also of unknowing. And I do a lot of work with kind of word-based images and fish kind of figure prominently. I have a fascination with fish. And this piece here explores, I called that Exploring My ART Identity. And you can see I have this kind of character person that pops up often, and it's a combination of collage, drawing, watercolor, lots of gel medium, things like that. And this image over here I did is part of a sketchbook series that I did while I was doing my PhD. And part of what I started looking at is the idea of reflection as the embodied practice of awareness and how that advances a potential realization of horizons and intersections of that awareness. And that's what was going on in this image. And I have some more of those I'll show later. The next word is fast, and not moving quickly, but as you know, I go back to Moby Dick, like a fast fish means it's there, it's adhered, it's part of the ship, part of the crew kind of stuff. So I started doing a lot of drawing or collage work and then adding sewing to it. So stitching right into the paper. So that's this one in here. And then this drawing, this figure was with me for a long time. And so I kind of stitched in this mat, again, working with collage, drawing, canvases, cutting through canvases, finding spaces that are both revealed and concealed. This was an image I did when I was living in California, but I was finding my identity back in Michigan. And it was always fun to introduce that in California because, they were kind of like, what's with the mitten? And so I could always talk about what's with the mitten. Continuing, I went back to doing drawing. I took a class when I was in Cincinnati and did like drawing from memory and drawing from life. So I started doing drawings where I was using just probably pencil on paper, but then I started adding collage elements. Whereas some of my collages you'll see later are full on collages, but then I started changing the space where the drawing was more present and the collage elements were smaller, where they were interacting in the spaces within and around my drawings. Constant. This was a series I did where I found this boat and I called it the Miss Karen series. I was in the Wisconsin Dells once, and there was this boat called the Miss Karen, and I like stopped the car, took a photo, and I just got fascinated with the name Karen, and it started coming up in the oddest of places. I did this large canvas, so these are like pieces of canvas. It's all crayon on canvas, and got fascinated with having a place where I would have my own voyage, someplace where my own arc to take these matching creatures to these imagined creatures to this, wherever the Miss Karen was going. This was a sound piece where it talked about spending 40 days and 40 nights aboard the Miss Karen. This was another sound piece that if you played it, it was the voice of Jerry Seinfeld, and it said, "Hey Karen, it's Jerry Seinfeld," and something like that. So I got fascinated with that. This book is titled Karen, and I went through and redacted it with just white out ink, unless it referenced something about what Karen was doing. The story was really bad, but my purpose was different. And then another sculpture came out of it. I still have this kind of boat lifesaver with the Miss Karen on it. And so that I felt was kind of a constant. I took the drawing on with crayon on canvas to another level with these ideas of being riveted in place. So these are they're probably 12-foot high by 8-foot across. And this is probably, 12 by 4. And so what I did was I did these drawings and I had certain characters that would kind of come up in my video works. And so this one was called Head Over Heels. And I recorded myself singing kind of a version of the go-go song Head Over Heels, but in a really odd way. And so I had like recorded my fingers kind of running in these boots, and that was the bottom. And then there was kind of a video up here that was my hand thinking, and the hand was a character I came up with, and the character's name was Sniffy the Wonder Paw, and it figured in lots of videos and stuff. And I have long fingers, and so I could make like Sniffy do things and move around, and my kids are terrified by it, but again, it's part of me. This other one was called Saying Something Stupid. So I took Barbie doll heads. I worked with an artist in New York who helped me record a different version of the Saying Something Stupid by Frank and Nancy Sinatra. And then the two characters here sang the song. And it filled the space with the sound. Then moving into this is actually sitting in my office right now, but the idea of standing, of being still, also connected to what I called stopped. And I did these series of 3 boxes. This one was done for a show at the Dayton Museum of Art, and I got really fascinated by doing it, so I made 2 more. And I called them stop motion 1, 2, and 3. And I wanted to do I have such a fascination with stop motion animation, which is why Marcel the Shell is with me today. Um, and so that idea of stopping motion, that you have the potential of what's to come, but you also don't know what the past is because you're only seeing this one part of time. And I see a lot of artwork and art making through that lens. So those were those three. This one here was part of an installation at the Dayton Museum of Art. So it was a video recording that I called Rowing Up the Cheryl, which is a river in Oxford over in England. So I cast my hands in dress pattern paper. I made a boat that sat right here out of dress pattern paper. And then those hands ended up being inside this stop motion years later. And this is, I gifted it over to Nilese. It's sitting in Nilese's office because she said she liked it. So I said, you live with it for a while. And then this piece down here, I was captivated. I wanted to do a stop motion animation, and I did. It was called The Gift. It actually plays on my website. I'm not going to play it now, but it can. And it's to everybody who does stop motion animation. If you do watch it, my apologies. It was my way of doing it, and I wasn't terribly good at it, but it was for me, it was about being stuck and stopped in the process. And so I wanted to see that through. Another word was steady. I started to make what I called artist books, and participated with a group called Bookworks when I was living in Cincinnati. And but my books were more sculptural. So this is the outside of the box, and then all of these pieces live inside the box. This is another one where the actual piece is this is a wooden cigar box. And then when you open it up, there's a fan that comes out, and there's a kind of a text-based story here. Again, dress pattern paper. I use a lot of maps. And again, you can see fish are coming up here. Another book in a box that was called Fabricationing. And it kind of goes along this trail. It's two-sided. But I felt this idea of a lot of my work I see as being quite intimate. And that idea of remaining stays with me. This was a project I did for my master's in art education from DAP at the University of Cincinnati. And my task was to get all of this stuff that represents my journey of doing my master's in art education and get it into this box. And so that this is this collection, and inside this box, when you would open it, it would be a letter that said, dear reader, here's what you're encountering. And it talked about everything that was inside the box. So I like this idea of having this intimate association, not only with the making, but then also with the sharing of it. And I see these ideas of books as being something where one person could interact with at a time. And then persisting is about a series of works that I called These Places Thus Far. And these are kind of taking that collage idea like into a deep conversation with myself. So this first one represents Detroit. So it's kind of me, my journey, kind of growing up as a young girl. I was born in Detroit, but we moved to Grand Rapids for 6 years, and it's kind of this me and my older sister represented in this way. There were other things that came up outside of maps. A lot of this is sewing that I did into the canvas. These are all 8x10 or 10x8, depending on the orientation. I used my old Girl Scout handbook and found badges that kind of symbolized places. From Detroit, I moved to Chicago. This is where I did my MFA. I also did a minor in women's studies, so that's kind of part of what's going on here. I also divorced this creepy guy I was married to, so that's me putting his feet in the bucket of cement and letting him go adrift. From there, I moved to New York. Again, started a new life, got my first teaching job there at the New School University. After several years there, and experiencing a room of my own, I did meet someone and I got married. I moved to Oxford, so this is me moving to Oxford. Had my first baby there. Zoe was born there, so that is persisting there. Then we moved to Singapore for a little while. I felt like a giant in Singapore because being pregnant, I got like super big, and everybody in Singapore is small. And I remember trying to buy a nursing bra, and they were like, "We have nothing that would fit you in this place." And then from there, we moved to Ireland. So, Dublin, I had my second baby. That's Kieran. And she's the one that was born with a heart defect. So there's a lot of medical stuff here. And this cottage that is one that we would go to with the kids. They really loved it because it was a thatched roof and it was like, oh my God, it's so cool. Then we moved to Cincinnati, and in Cincinnati, my first time there is where I went back to school. That's where I earned my master's in art ed and got my first teaching certification. So that started my foray into art education. And I started working as an adjunct after graduating there, but I was also a high school art teacher. Then we moved to LA. And in LA, I was a high school art teacher, but I was also an adjunct at Cal State Long Beach. And this one has a lot more sewing on it because driving in LA, we lived up in Arcadia. I worked down in Long Beach. It was crazy trying to navigate LA. Then it was back to Cincinnati. Our kids didn't talk to us for about a month because they were so happy to be in LA and wanted to go to high school there. So, but I went back to the University of Cincinnati. That's where I earned my PhD, and also got my first job, which took me to Michigan. And so these places thus far, and this is where I'm hanging out now. So these are conversations, like I said, deep conversations. That's how I see collage. For me, it's bringing together all these disparate elements, but making a conversation happen. And they're small and they're intimate, and they are like kind of two-sided books because they have a back side as well, but meaning you can engage with them however you choose. These are really crappy pictures. Sorry, I wanted to show you details of like the sewing and some of the process on these. The idea of thinking while I was doing my PhD, for every semester, I created what I called a visual reflection journal. So all my coursework was captured. So in like one semester, the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And these were all journals that I would get when I would go to the like MAEA or NAEA conferences. They give you these free journals. And so I just started kind of having these conversations. And there's a link there to a website that I kind of talk about it. When I was in Cincinnati, one of my students in art education, who is a graphic designer, made this website for me and wanted to record everything about what was going on in these journals. So reflection again comes up all the time in my ways that I research, and always thinking. But again, you'll see more maps, more sewing, more dress pattern paper in the thinking process. And making. So again, having other conversations. These are conversations that I was having with ideas of drawing, with capturing presence and place and being. And they have these kind of interactive elements where you can kind of lift up these pieces. This one shows this progress across the country. We did a Route 66 tour when we moved from Chicago to LA. So that's kind of showing that there. And looking at the history of drawing through some of these books and references that come up. And you might know some of these books from looking at this, like how to do painting, how to do drawing, right? Those kind of things. But I started adding more collage and adding parts of how I would map out these parts of a body, parts of a process, because I always go back to this idea. And part of what I do in making, and I'm just going to go back to the original image, is this is for me is about being slow, being steady, being persistent, being here, being recurring. So all of those verbs come up for me all the time. And I have a copy of the book, The Slow Professor, that I refer to because it's about this idea of slowing down, because it's like you have to publish or perish. And it's like, but why do you have to do it fast? And I always talk to my students when we talk about like standardized testing and what are the benchmarks for standardized testing, who made them and why, and all that. It's one of the things I always struggled with, and my GRE score in math will hear me out, bear me out on this, because I got such a low score. Why is fast math important? Why is doing time tests important? And in this book, there's this sentence about slowing down is about asserting the importance of contemplation, connectedness, fruition, and complexity. And I love that about it. And another idea about slow ontology is this idea of modes of writing scholarly research that are not unproductive, but differently productive. And throughout my time doing my dissertation work, I really stressed the idea, and I actually had to defend twice and find someone else to get on my committee because someone decided they were not going to accept what I was doing. And so it was quite challenging, but at the same time, when I did my second defense, I dug so deep into why is this important to me? And this idea of being differently productive. I used self-study and critical discourse analysis, and it was arts-based research. And so someone on my committee who had lots of opportunities to disembark from this journey but didn't, decided it wasn't real research. And interestingly enough, I have a whole chapter devoted to what makes arts-based research different and why. And the scholarship was all there to support it. And so I think the idea of slow talks about movements that are slow. They involve issues of knowing across time. And for me, that's a big deal because I don't feel that I know. I'm always in a state of knowing, which keeps me in a state of becoming. So I always feel like I'm always becoming in this identity. It's not, some of the words might say fixed and fast, but it's about the process of finding that identity and fixing it fast in your mind. And that's what I play into. Being across time and the idea of slow, a state of being in which scholars choose to live writing and research through locality, materiality, and artisan craft. So this is where I'm ending it. So that's my talk and my blurb about how I got here. And oh, look, I can stop sharing. And if there's any questions or comments, I can do that. I'll do that now. I wasn't looking at the chat, which I guess I can do now. My verbs. Well, and thanks for saying that, Amy, because the number of times I say verbs to our art ed students and about what's the doing that's going on in this classroom. Because it can look like chaos. And Amy, I know you know so much about this. Marcel, thank you. Call out to Marcel. Is that idea of chaos is actually, it's the making and the doing in action. So I like that. So
I actually do have a question since nobody else handed it up. Thank you, first of all. That was an absolute treat to hear you talk about your work and to share sort of the narrative behind it, and very inspiring. Um, One thing I kind of want to throw out to you, but also to the group is, you have an MFA and a PhD, and you talked about your, I'm going to use the word battles because I had a similar experience, although my advisor was really very supportive. But this notion of bringing visual literacy and the visual voice as valid and equal to the verbal in that very scholarly academic space, that struggle. What do you think the folks around you who aren't traditionally visual in nature learned from you in that academic setting? Because that's part of my crusade. Let's get, what we all do in these spaces here at CCS into the broader spaces of that sort of visual or that verbally prioritized text.
Mm. Because so my chair, when I started my dissertation, her background was in secondary mathematics. And I asked her when we first met, I said, is this a pity? Did you choose me because of my bad GRE score in math? And she said, no, 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 I chose you because you do this stuff with STEAM. And I do that in mathematics all the time. And I appreciate what happens in, how art and interacts through the notions of mathematics. And she explored math as in a more artful manner. And so she and I used to go to exhibitions together, and it was wonderful because I could walk through exhibitions with her and give her a perspective about how these things kind of connect. Not only experiences in art making, but also how, like what she was doing with mathematics, and how could she kind of connect more deeply with understanding art through a lens of somebody who has studied it. And I also made it a point of having someone on my committee, Dr. Flavia Bastos from Cincinnati, because she understands and writes about arts-based research. I knew I needed a champion there. And so I had two really good champions. I thought I had a third. But then I found a fourth. And she was very supportive because she supported my Master's of Art Education work too. So, but I think for me, I feel it gives me a stronger connection to not only how did I get here and how did thinking visually inform me. And I like having that in my background because I think it rounds me out, if that makes sense. And it keeps me kind of buoyed here. And also I like the idea of buoys because, they are there as a place marker, but they can also be set adrift. Yeah, Rob.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a real pleasure to have a chance to see your work. I was especially captivated by the map collage work of the places that you've lived, and wonder if you could speak a little bit about how you navigate something that is personally meaningful and that you also want to resonate with an audience, so that the iconography um, can be meaningful to others, and it isn't so restricted that it's only meaningful to you.
That's an excellent question. I appreciate that because those works were in a faculty show when I was at OU, so Oakland University show. And I was surprised they got chosen. But when I remember taking people to see the show, and then even during the opening, and I was surprised at how the works had entry because they were so personal. And it's a body of work I was never going to try and sell because it's all about my journey, right? Um, but I I I wanted people to interact with them, and I did encourage them that they could pick them up and they could look at the back because you can see the sewing on the back. And then on the back, I have some things where I I might have some comments or some of my, maybe they were quotes, but also it could be if I was referencing, I like to put citations in everything I do as well. So I'm always citing. So that artist, researcher, teacher is always present and interlocking. And it was, for me, it was really fascinating because I didn't feel that they would translate, and they did. And what was interesting to talk with people, and they were usually one-on-one conversations, and they would come out, usually they would say, I know these are like really specific and personal to you, but the idea of mapping out a journey resonates for me because, and then they would kind of start telling me their story. And I didn't know that the conversation would move from a conversation with me. And it's not only in my head, because for me, reflection has to be verbal, right? It has to come out. There has to be dialogue about it, right? So whether I'm having a conversation with myself in making, then I'm having a conversation with an audience in viewing. And then I'm having a conversation with a person one-on-one that can tell me their own personal story about this. So yeah, I found it fascinating because I didn't think it would happen. So I appreciate that question, Rob. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Do we have any other questions for Karen? No? Well, Karen, thank you. Again, it was a true pleasure. I know it's a big deal to curate all those moments and very personal pieces of your work, and it was well received. And again, I'm super inspired. Now I don't want to do my meetings this afternoon. I'd rather go to do some collages. So Carrie, sorry. But anyway,
Oh,
thank you so much. And thank you everyone for spending your
oh,
lunch
thanks
hour with
everyone.
us. And this will be available on YouTube. And Karen, make sure you send it out to your girls and John.
I invited them. I don't think they could get in, but yeah, I'll send them the YouTube link.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
thanks,
Thanks,
Allie.
everybody. Have a
Thank you,
great St.
everyone.
Thank
Patrick's
you
Day.
so much.
Bye.